doing P6 in management operations, and we're finishing off the passes. So we're doing this straight from the beginning. So P6 says assess the factors within the business environment that impact upon operations management and decision making for managers and leaders. Okay, so assess is a key word. Assess sometimes can mean weigh up. So weigh up the factors within the business environment. Now obviously we're working to Pearson's specification, and having looked at Pearson's specification, what do we mean by the business environment?
Looking at the ethical way.
Yes.
And the social.
Yes, so looking at ethical considerations or ethical conduct by organizations in the private sector, and also looking at corporate social responsibility, CRS, corporate social, CSR, corporate social responsibility. So we're not really talking about PESTEL or SWOT, which you could think the the environment factors could be, but no, in this respect we're looking at the corporate social responsibility, sustainability, ethical conduct, and things like that have an effect on the operations management of an organization, and how the decisions from leaders and managers are affected by these environmental factors. Okay, so if we look at corporate social responsibility, how would you define corporate social responsibility?
It's a business model that helps a company to be socially accountable.
A business model that helps is self-regulatory, so it's not regulated, it's self-regulatory, that helps businesses become more accountable
to the socially.
More socially accountable.
Yeah,
okay, with regards to sustainability. Okay, and it's self-regulating. What have you guys got?
No, I didn't work with that.
What have you guys got?
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Self-regulating business model that helps the company be socially accountable to itself,
yes,
its stakeholders, and the public.
To itself, its stakeholders, and to the public. Okay, good. And so let's take some examples then of Tesco's. So in terms of Tesco's, how is Tesco's being, or developing their corporate social responsibility? In what areas are they doing this?
In customer and more
in the community.
In the communities.
Environmental.
In environmental. Yep.
In health and well-being.
In helping well-being. Good. So we know that Tesco's, for instance, are trying to care for the environment. So they've got targets. They've got targets and they've got actual figures.
Yeah.
Now the targets, firstly, in terms of CO2 emissions, is 6%, but their actual CO2 emissions are 12.9%. So they're not doing too well there. Reduced carbon emissions, 0%. They're at 0.6%. Percentage of waste, they're at 95% percentage of waste, reducing the percentage of waste. They're at 96%. So, and they're encouraging customers to reduce their environmental impact is 3, but they're at 4. So they're not quite hitting all their QPIs in terms of the key performance indicators, but they are moving towards trying to care more for the environment. So they've got targets, they've actually compared their actual figures to their targets, but they haven't quite achieved it. In addition to that, we can see in terms of activity supporting local communities, staff and fundraising. They had staff of Tesco's all over the UK are fundraising for good causes, and they had a target of 1 million. They raised £900,000. Tesco's supports the local community, and again they're hitting their targets of supporting local community. Okay. Helping customers live healthy lives. Again, they had a target of 1,000. They reached 3,120, so they actually beat their target in terms of trying to provide a more healthy lifestyle. In fact, even if you actually walk into some Tesco stores, I don't know your stores, but in my local store in Thornton Heath, they've got fruits. So if kids and families walking around, they are told that they can help themselves to these fruits and eat it as they're going along. And it's free for them to eat. Yes. So I thought that was quite a nice kind of thing in terms of healthy eating and helping and giving back to the community. I thought that was quite nice as well. So we can see that Tesco's are trying to help in many areas, and even in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. So if we are relating corporate social responsibility, because I'm following on to the question, and we'll look at ethical decisions in a second. So if we're looking at that, then the next question would be we've looked at corporate social responsibility, what is it? We've then looked at what Tesco's are doing, but then we are now saying to ourselves, how does this affect the transformation process? And how does that affect specifically the decisions taken by managers and leaders? So what we're saying is that in the transformation process, we know, again, you could explain that briefly by saying there are inputs, and then in the middle of the company, transformation of those inputs being staff, finances, resources, foods, whatever it is, machinery. In the company, there's a transformation process, and then you have the outputs. And on the outside, you have factors in an open, transformational, open system affecting the company. So what examples have you got? What examples did you get? Anyone got an example in terms of corporate social responsibility and how that example affects the decision makers, decisions taken by managers and leaders?
I think working in partnership with communities, like
Yes.
local communities,
Yes.
then because, like you said, in Tesco they lost 6.4 billion.
6.4 billion, yes.
They also
Yes. Okay, good. But what? So they. Okay, so what's the example that you're giving in terms of working with communities?
This is working together.
Okay, working together. So let me give you an example then. Thank you for trying, that was good. So the example that I have is, now we know in a transformation process, and we're talking about corporate social responsibility, that corporate social responsibility again is what? Let's go back to the definition, is what? What is it, Meti?
It's like a model of that helps itself and the stakeholders and the public, and is a social. It helps the company to be accountable socially.
Socially accountable,
Yes.
helping the wider environment, helping communities, as you said. So let's take the example that we know that Tesco's want to expand, yes?
Yes.
And Tesco's try to expand all the time in many different areas. So let's take a specific example. In Streatham, they wanted to expand in Streatham. So they wanted to expand and to build a new kind of like a huge, it's not like a Metro or Express store, it's more like the size of a superstore, but in a, like a slightly out of the town centre. It's more like it's a cross between a Metro store and a superstore. And so how did that expansion of a new store in Streatham help towards corporate social responsibility? Well, in terms of building the store, they would obviously think about the emissions.
Yeah.
They would also think about, how much CO2 they're actually releasing into the environment. But also, what they did was they worked with community groups. They worked with community groups to find out what the community wanted in Streatham. So they built a swimming pool in the local community, which was built by Tesco's. They also built an ice ring. Tesco's don't sell ice or ice rings, but they built an ice ring. In fact, the ice ring was previously there. It was a Streatham ice ring, and there was a swimming pool there. So that was all demolished. So they built back a swimming pool, and they built back a brand new ice skating ring. In addition to that, to help the local community, they built on top of Tesco's, they built affordable social housing and living. So now Tesco's, who deals with food in Streatham, have built social housing in Streatham. They rebuilt a brand new swimming pool, a brand new ice skating ring to replace what was already there. So they're helping the community. They're looking after the community in terms of social housing. They're thinking about the community in terms of their own other needs, in terms of other facilities. Yeah, as well as thinking about the parking facilities and everything else. So in terms of that one specific example, we can see here how corporate social responsibility has affected the managers and leaders of building a new Tesco store in Streatham. It's affected the decision making of them not just building a store, but also building an ice rink, a swimming pool, and affordable housing, or where people can live. See, normally, if you're thinking 15 or 20 years earlier, well, the decision by managers and leaders of Tesco's, they're not going to be thinking build a swimming pool, they're not going to be thinking build an ice rink, they're not going to be thinking of affordable housing, are they? But what they are doing is they're looking at the needs of the community. So they're actually looking at corporate social responsibility. And the definition of it in terms of Tesco's, they say, is the relationship with community customers. Self-regulating helps to be more socially accountable. More socially accountable. So here they are being more socially accountable. Okay? Yep. Okay. Switch it off, please. Now. So you can use examples like that. So when I say give an example, give an actual example and see how that's actually related in terms of Tesco's being corporate social responsibility. Look this way. Okay. Now let's look at ethical considerations. So what are ethical considerations?
So before we start that, me and Dee were doing based on the employment.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me.
Okay. So
yes.
basically we're talking about how the leaders and managers in Tesco make their staff members treat each other.
Yes.
And like respect, in order for them to work as a team and perform well.
And how do they treat their staff? You have to use example. You've got to tell me specifically how they do and what they do.
What about the recycling in terms of environment? So they decided to use the recycling.
Yes. So we're talking about two different things here. Okay, we're talking about two different things. But the point is, if you're given an example, you've got to detail the exact example and how it relates to corporate social responsibility. Definitely the environmental factor, and Tesco's, were the first, food retailer to start charging for their bags. When it came out, not the first company, but they started reducing their bag sizes. They started charging for their bags, and they started selling larger bags as well. They started selling larger bags, and so how does this affect? So that's the example, and then you say, how does this affect the decision making by managers and leaders? Well, it's affected decision making in terms of the buying team. The buying team has now been affected by their plastic bags, because they think in terms of corporate social responsibility, in terms of being more socially accountable to the environment. So now they're thinking, well, we've got to reduce our bags. So now they're produced and made a bigger bag, and a bigger bag that you buy and you keep. So you keep reusing that bag. They had to source that bag. They had to find a manufacturer of that bag. They had to go and source it. They had to go and spend a lot more time and effort and work in terms of what they had to do so that people could buy this bag as opposed to another bag. They had to train their staff. They had to then produce a training program to train their staff, to get their staff to recommend these bags. Because at the point of sale, your biggest salesperson is going to be your member of staff to say, would you like this bag? Do you see how it's affected the managers and leaders' decision making? So now you're thinking about your previous companies who supply plastic bags. Now you're saying to them, well, can you reduce the number of plastic in it? Well, can you reduce the size of the bag? So now it's affecting the decision making. Understand? Good, that's a good example. So if you're going to use an example, you have to use an example, explain the example, and then relate it to the operations management and how it affects decisions of managers and leaders, because you have to answer the question. Make sense? Yes? Okay. So let's look at what are ethical considerations, please. What are ethics? Ethical conduct, tell me. Yes, go on.
morally correct, wrong.
Yes, hold on a second. Morally correct and honourable. So ethical conduct, according to Tesco,